with all of you. Gareth, you're okay with that?
Of course, yes.
Yeah, okay. And George and Andreas, you're okay?
Yeah, it's okay.
Because, I mean, ideally, we might want to use this for the Open University so that students from the Open University will have access to this. But anyone else who's interested, okay. So I'm gonna start, if that's okay with you. I don't have anybody else wishing to join us. There's no emails. Let me check Viber. There's no one in the Viber wishes to join. So I'm gonna start, if that's okay. I'm gonna share the screen. Let me see. Right. Okay, I'm gonna share the screen. Right. Yeah. Okay. Allow. Okay. Good. So, if at any point we have, someone is asking. Let's see who is asking. Right. Admit. Hi, Kirill. How are you? Oh, that's Gota. Hi, Gota.
Gota,
Hi. Thank you for joining us, Gota. Right. So I'll start, if that's okay with you. I'll start, and as I said, the plan is I will do some sort of presentation of the volume. Then Andreas will speak, then Giorgos will speak, then Gota will speak, and then if we have any questions or further interventions from any of the speakers, we're open to discuss, or if we have any questions from people who join us or Gareth, please ask them then. So this is the cover of the volume. So it's the philosophical and theological approaches on war and St. Gregory Palamas, published by Pempousia, which is a hub of publications that the Holy Monastery of Atopedi in Mount Athos has made, and more particularly St. Maxim the Greek. I will speak a little bit further on this later on. Okay, so a little bit about the background. Now, the background is that we had some discussions in Orthodox churches worldwide about how an official Orthodox church, which is the Russian church, and its representatives, Patriarch Alexei II of Moscow in particular, took an open and obvious pro-war stance in the war in Ukraine, which also has an Orthodox church. Now, this depended on places, took a more serious sort of content, instigating discussions between the people who went to the churches. In some of these discussions, the climate was very good. In some of them was not so good. In the parishes that I have been in Scotland, the discussions were very civilized, of course, but there was an ongoing concern about where Orthodoxy is going if we have such a stance from a major leader, the Patriarch of Moscow. Like, where is Orthodoxy going? So a lot of people approached me asking my opinion, and I was saying, we have to discuss this further, like in a more scholarly way. And I discussed this with collaborators and the founders of Palamas Seminar, and we decided that it would be best if we have a conference. And that's why we had the conference. That's why we have this volume. Now, Professor Giorgos, in his contribution, the last contribution in the volume, discusses, why this is so serious for Orthodoxy today, like what is happening with Patriarch of Moscow, and why his stance is a serious issue, a serious concern for Orthodoxy. So now the background also is this, that the Ecumenical Patriarchate Synod officially recognized the autocephaly of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church on 6th of January 2019. Preliminary decision reached in October 2018. Now, this is important to note because the Ecumenical Patriarch cannot decide on his own, right? He has a synod of his own, and him and the other metropolitans and bishops in that synod, they decide things together, and this is the official decision of the Ecumenical Patriarchate Synod. And they had, of course, discussed the issue for a longer time than what the dates that we see here. But prior to this, the Ecumenical Patriarchate had authorized the Patriarchate of Moscow to have jurisdiction over Ukraine in a letter of 1686. So from 1686, officially, in terms of synodical letters, etc., the Patriarchate of Moscow had jurisdiction over Ukraine until 2018. Also, prior to 2018, there were some letters of excommunication of certain bishops in the now autocephalous Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which were lifted in October 2018. So this was very important. The excommunications had to be lifted first, of course, in October 2018, and then the recognition of the autocephaly on 6th of January 2019, because the autocephalous Church of Ukrainian Orthodox Church had these bishops that were excommunicated, so they had to be reinstated in a prior sort of synodical decision, and this was done in October 2018. So it was much easier to recognize the autocephaly in 6th of January 2019. Now, Professor Barnovi Gotcha here has discussed a lot of these issues in his very informative and detailed contribution. I'm going to refer to it later on as well. Now, the situation in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was complex, of course, prior to 2019. And even now, the autocephaly of the Ukrainian Church is disputed by the Russian Orthodox Church. As I said, Professor Barnovi's paper on this volume discusses this in detail. Make a note that we had an invasion into Crimea 2014, and of course, in February 2022, there was an invasion into the eastern provinces of Ukraine. So there were, in some parishes, quite fierce ecclesiastical, pastoral issues related to the situation in Ukraine for the Orthodox churches worldwide. Now, 4 papers in this issue, in this volume, discuss this, but suffice it to say that in many parishes in UK that I know, for example, I don't know about Georgia, but in many parishes in UK, we had in our own parish in Glasgow a lot of Russian Orthodox that stopped coming after the autocephaly of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was recognized by the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which of course didn't pose a problem for the believers as such, because they also have now a Russian Orthodox Church in Glasgow, so they go to their own church. But for many other parishes in UK that they don't have Russian Orthodox Church, that was a serious issue. Where are the Russians going? So for some parishes that they have established their own church, they found their own churches and they went there. But for some others, they didn't. The situation, just to give you an example, in Glasgow is that we have Russians, we have Ukrainians coming, very few Russians, but we have Russians and also Ukrainians coming. But in the past, let's say 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we had a lot of Russian Orthodox in the Greek Orthodox Church that we have in Glasgow. Of course, it's in the church we have many languages. Both the priests and the singers, the cantors, sing and speak in of course Greek, English, Russian, Romanian, and in some instances Ukrainian. Just to give you an example. Now, what we did with the conference and the volume is focused on theological, ecclesiastical, philosophical and theological issues, not so much the pastoral aspect of it. Perhaps in the future, we might organize something about the pastoral, but the primary focus was philosophical, theological, ecclesiastical, and issues. Okay. So as I said, the founders and collaborators in Palamas Seminar decided to organize a relevant Palamas Seminar International Conference in Greece to discuss these issues within the broader context of theological and philosophical approaches to war, with a special mention to St. Gregory Palamas, because it's a Palamas Seminar after all. Of course, we had the blessings of the local metropolitan there, Metropolitan Panteleimon. But this is why the volume 24 of Analogia was compiled, primarily 8 papers from the conference, and it was published this September. Okay. So, as I said, the conference was organized at Skiti-Verias, in particular Holy Monastery of Theotokos at Kalipetra in Greece in July 2023, with the blessings of His Eminence Metropolitan Panteleimon of Veria, Naus, and Campania, with more than 20 participants from Greece, UK, Cyprus, Germany, Austria, Belgium, Romania, and Georgia, and had hybrid sessions with participants from USA, Russia, and other countries. So a variety of philosophical, theological views were discussed. St. Gregory Palamas as such was discussed in around 5 to 6 presentations. Now, the importance of the conference, of course, was twofold: provided a forum of exchange of ideas regarding the roots of war and how to consider war and its implications today, both philosophically and theologically. And it also provided the opportunity to researchers to present their work in relation to the ongoing tensions between the Russian Orthodox Church and the now autocephalous Ukrainian Church, and the consequences of these tensions in the way we see certain key Orthodox positions. Okay, so it had a broader spectrum. It wasn't only focused on Orthodox issues, but also we had participants presenting philosophical ideas about war and peace. So 8 papers were published in the volume, September 2025. Palamas Seminar and I, personal as guest editor, are very much grateful to senior editor, Professor Father Nicholas Ludovicos, who joined us for some time in the conference, the managing editor, Dr. Maria Tsafaridou, and all the staff who were involved in the production of the volume, and of course, St. Maxim the Greek Institute and Pempousia for covering the publication expenses. So what we're going to do is a brief presentation of the contents, and after this there will be interventions from the colleagues present, and then we will accept questions and provide answers. So first I'll start with my paper. Now, the order of presentation of the papers in the volume was just alphabetical. It didn't have any kind of ranking of importance or anything like that. It was just alphabetical. So what I did in my paper is basically review some key problems in modern ethical theory as it relates to war. I find that both contemporary philosophical theory and relevant analysis of concepts are not helpful in allowing us to understand what is war and how best to stop it. I examine in particular the ideas of Professor Micah Walzer, a major figure in relevant debates, and an advisor to both USA policymaking and the State of Israel. I then turned my focus to St. Gregory Palamas' views on war and peace, and what we can learn from Palamas' hesychastic approach regarding the social and political phenomenon of violence and war. I find that in Palamas, we have both a diagnosis of the phenomenon, illness, and a therapy, control and transformation of the powers of the heart and the soul-body union with ascesis, niptic and ceaseless prayer, and participation in divine mysteries. So basically, Palamas finds the phenomenon of war as part of an illness. It's an illness, and suggests a therapy to this illness. And of course, he believes that we cannot have peace without establishing this therapeutic approach. My discussion, of course, closes with a brief examination of the problems related to the perspective term political hesychasm that I found very, very important. Political hesychasm is a term that is fairly recent in Orthodox philosophy and theology. It has been discussed, as I say in my paper, first by Meyendorf and a few other theologians in the 70s, 80s, and recently has become very, very important in Russian theological discussions and philosophical discussions that support the war. So, and I discuss how this political and cultural perspective bears no relevance to the true hesychastic approach and Palamite hesychasm in particular. I find the term in my paper grave diggeries, like you search in a grave, find something that you can use and use it in any obscene way that you can imagine, and a serious anachronism, trying to bring to Orthodoxy some Western attitudes regarding church-state relations that, of course, in Orthodoxy don't exist. We don't have phenomena such as Caesaropapism, which states, for example, that the Pope is a head of a state with its own ambassadors and army. We never had that in the Orthodox world. In Protestantism, of course, the head of a Protestant church can be a king or a queen. For example, Anglican church. We never had these things in the Orthodox world, and any kind of attempt to establish political hesychasm as a term, I find, is influenced by Western attitudes regarding church-state relations, and that's why it should be avoided. If some particular actions of Orthodox leaders provide evidence in this regard, as I said, isolated Orthodox leaders, this cannot express the spirit of hesychasm, as this can be found in the writings of Palamas. Overall, political hesychasm should be discarded and avoided in relevant Orthodox discussions. So these were my views. Now, next in the volume is, of course, the paper of Professor Barnovi, who is Dean of Faculty of Theology in Sukhan Sabar Baryani University in Tbilisi, Georgia. And he provided a very well-focused and very detailed canonical and ecclesiological discussion, especially of the objections raised by the Russian Orthodox Church and the response from the Ecumenical Patriarchate decision to grant autocephaly to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. The first line of opposition concerns the legitimacy of the Ecumenical Patriarchate's canonical authority to confer autocephaly, particularly regarding its jurisdictional claims over the Ukrainian ecclesiastical territory. So Professor Barnovi, analyzing foundational canonical sources, most notably Canons 9, 17, 28 of the Fourth Ecumenical Council. These are proposes and demonstrates the historical and canonical basis for Constantinople's prerogatives within the Orthodox Church, including its recognized role as the arbiter in matters of appeal and ecclesiastical order. Special emphasis is placed on the 1686 Patriarchal Act, which temporarily permitted the Patriarch of Moscow to ordain the Metropolitan of Kiev, a concession granted ad economia and never intended as a transfer of jurisdiction. So basically, the idea here is that the Ecumenical Patriarchate always had jurisdiction over Ukraine. In 1686, there was a Patriarchal Act temporarily permitting the Patriarch of Moscow to ordain a Metropolitan of Kiev, but this was not transfer of jurisdiction. This is very important in terms of ecclesiological and canonical analysis of what happened. The second accusation pertains to recognition of ordinations performed during the schism. Through an analysis of canonical tradition and conciliar precedents, the study illustrates the Church's consistent application of ecclesiastical economia in similar cases throughout history. The ordinations of clergy during schismatic periods, including those of Philaret and Macarius, are shown to possess canonical validity and apostolic succession. Professor Barnovi's article concludes that the decision of the Ecumenical Patriarchate aligns with established canonical procedures and historical practice, and the Ukrainian Church's autocephaly thus represents a legitimate and necessary response to contemporary ecclesial geopolitical realities, aimed at restoring canonical order and preserving the unity of the Orthodox Church. The next participation was from Alicia Borombin, who is associate professor at the same university. She discussed the views of Eti Hillesum and Julia de Beausombre and the way they approach suffering and the way they envisage suffering as aiding someone to progress spiritually. So in Eti Hillesum, there is an evolution of the meaning of suffering according to the progress of your own spiritual growth. In her life, she was able to gather integrated experiences, maturing understanding of suffering by linking it to that of others. And for her, recognizing her own and others' pain meant strengthening her trust in God. Suffering was seen as a source from which to draw strength and overcome obstacles. And suffering offers, therefore, a potential for humanization. And in Julia's term, participation. The next one was from John Farina, who participated remotely via web link. And he discussed St. Augustine and Catherine of Siena, a Roman Catholic saint, and how their models of peacemaking could be compared. The next was from Martin Hanel from Bremen University in Germany, and he discussed in detail Max Scheler and Joseph Maria Bohensky and compared Scheler's metaphysical idealism with Bohensky's practical virtue ethics. The next one was from Guram Luzmanashvili, and he's a lecturer of modern Orthodox theology and political theology in the university in Georgia. And he compared the way the Georgian and Ukrainian Orthodox Church traditions developed and why there was a discussion about whether to recognize the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in the Georgian Orthodox Church. So he also examines the prospects for the recognition of the autocephaly of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine by the Orthodox Church of Georgia. I don't know if things have changed from the time that he presented the paper and he submitted his paper. perhaps Professor Barnovi will be able to talk a little bit more about this. Francisco de Vitoria's Jews. The next is from Lisa Dragbar, who is from the Department of Philosophy, University of Vienna, and her paper on Francisco de Vitoria's Jus Post Bellum and the Principle of Punitive Justice. Now, Francisco de Vitoria, of course, is famous in philosophical circles about his views about prisoners and prison systems, but he also discussed the Jus Post Bellum, and Lisa presented in a very interesting way how his views could be applied to contemporary situations. The last participation was, of course, by Professor Stavros Giangazoglou. He is an associate professor, faculty of theology, National Kapodistrial University of Athens. And he presented the paper, War and Peace in the Hesychast Theology and Pastoral Practice of St. Gregory Palamas. He provided a detailed examination of the first inaugural address of St. Gregory Palamas as Archbishop of Thessaloniki, which he delivered in 1350, 3 days after his arrival in the city, following the cessation of the Zealot Revolution. I discussed this sermon also in my paper. And this homily contains an excellent theological and political approach to peace and was delivered at a historical juncture that clearly showed the successive internal and external dangers for waning Byzantium. Above all, however, this homily is of great interest to us in order to reconstruct elements and examples for our own time and experience. These highlights show that beyond barren antagonism and sterile ideological debates, through a genuine, critical, and creative dialogue of all the trends and currents in Orthodox theology of the 20th and 21st centuries, we ought to move forward, ultimately develop a contemporary, ecumenically fuller example of updated and discerning theology for our difficult and complex times. Again, Professor Giorgos also referred to the ecclesiastical problems that this tension in Ukraine has created for the Orthodox world, and of course the attitudes of the Patriarch of Moscow. And he has suggested some ways to bring these things forward and ease the tensions in the Orthodox theological world. He refers specifically, for example, in the meeting that we had in Crete with representatives of all the Orthodox churches except the Russian. Okay, so that was my short presentation. So thank you for your patience, and please forgive me for taking so much time. I invite now the comments from our eminent colleagues, and then we can answer questions from the rest of the participants. Perhaps you could suggest also 3 things: what ideas you liked from the volume, what ideas you could object, and why do you think is the contribution of this volume to relevant philosophical and theological research. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Andreas, you want to share some thoughts?
Costa, since the volume has a certain structure, I would say to allow me to talk last.
That's fine.
Because I will talk in the place of Giorgos, because I have the same specialty. So I'm going to say a couple of things about Palamas and the way he faces peace. So just allow me to talk a little bit later.
Okay. George, you want to speak?
I've got just one question to ask. Since from 1686, if I remember, the Patriarchate of Constantinople have given jurisdiction that Ukraine belongs to the Patriarchate of Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
Why? My question is, why in real terms this jurisdiction was lifted somehow, since the Patriarch of Constantinople decided to name the autocephaly in Ukrainian Church? What I don't understand is how a jurisdiction once was given and why the jurisdiction after some centuries was lifted. That's something I don't see.
If you don't mind, I will let Professor Barnovi talk about this because he has a lot of details in his paper about this. Professor Barnovi, do you want to speak about this? Thank you. We can't hear you. You have to unmute your microphone.
Sorry.
Yeah, we can hear you fine now. Thank you.
I agree to you all, and I would like to ask Mr. Konstantin to help me with the translation.
Yes, you can speak in Greek. Professor
Yeah.
Barnovi, you can speak in Greek, and I will translate in English.
Okay. So, αυτό το θέμα της αυτοκεφαλίας της Ουκρανίας και σχέσεις Ουκρανίας και Ρωσίας μέχρι τη στιγμή της αναγνώρισης της παραχώρησης της αυτοκεφαλίας της Ουκρανίας από το Οικουμενικό Πατριαρχείο ήταν άγνωστο και δεν συζητάγαμε αυτό το θέμα ποτέ. Αλλά εφόσον η Ουκρανία ως ανεξάρτητη χώρα ζήτησε την αυτοκεφαλία της Εκκλησίας της από χρόνια, λέω από 90, δεν ξέρω, θα μεταφράσεις ή θα συνεχίσω.
Wait one second. So Professor Barnovi said that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church hadn't asked for independence or autocephaly, okay, up until the 1990s. In the 1990s, sent representatives to the Ecumenical Patriarch and asked so that they will become autocephalous. So there were certain bishops who went to the Ecumenical Patriarch and said, look, we want to have an autocephalous Ukrainian church. So basically, Professor Barnovi says the issue hadn't arisen. I mean, it wasn't there. So, that's why the Ecumenical Patriarch kept that until until the time that he recognized the autocephaly. Yes, please continue, Professor Barnovi, please continue. Yeah.
Η Εκκλησία της Ουκρανίας ζήτησε από το Οικουμενικό Πατριαρχείο αυτό και παρέλαβε το τόμο της αυτοκεφαλίας 2019, που ας πούμε δεν ήταν τόσο ευχάριστο γεγονός για την Εκκλησία της Ρωσίας. Για αυτό το λόγο 2018 του Αύγουστο, προς το τέλος του Αυγούστου, ο Πατριάρχης της Ρωσίας, ο Κύριλλος, επισκέφτηκε το Οικουμενικό Πατριάρχη με παράκληση να μην παραχωρήσει το τόμο της αυτοκεφαλίας.
Wait one second. So Professor Barnovi says that in August of 2018, so before the Ecumenical Patriarch starts the process of the recognition, the Moscow Patriarch Alexei visited the Ecumenical Patriarch, saying to the Ecumenical Patriarch, don't recognize the autocephaly. Παρακαλώ, συνεχίστε.
Αλλά εμείς ξέρουμε από την εκκλησιαστική ιστορία ότι πάντοτε η διοίκηση της Εκκλησίας παρακολουθούσε την πολιτική κατάσταση. Δηλαδή αυτό είναι η θεωρία του Φωτίου που πάντοτε ισχύει στο Βυζάντιο και αργότερα. Όμως όταν η Εκκλησία της Ρωσίας απέκτησε την αυτοκεφαλία από τον Πατριάρχη Κωνσταντινούπολος, η ιερεμία του Δευτέρου,
της Ουκρανίας, κύριε καθηγητά, της Ουκρανίας, έτσι, η Εκκλησία της Ουκρανίας.
1589 λέω τώρα για τη Ρωσία.
Ναι,
εφόσον η Ρωσία έγινε μεγάλη αυτοκρατορία, ζήτησε την αυτοκεφαλία της Εκκλησίας της, κανονικά. Και παρέλαβε το τόμο, όχι της αυτοκεφαλίας, αλλά του πατριαρχικού αξιώματος, από το Πατριάρχη Κωνσταντινούπολος, ιερεμία του Δευτέρου. Λοιπόν.
Να μεταφράσω αυτά. Μια στιγμή να. Right. So Professor Barnovi says that even the Russian Orthodox Church received the autocephaly sort of thing from the Ecumenical Patriarch in 1580, if I remember the year. And the Ecumenical Patriarch gave the dignity, if you like, or the rank of a patriarch to the Russian Patriarch. So that's why he also probably gave the Metropolitan of Kiev to have a position in the new church that was founded in Russia. Okay. Παρακαλώ, συνεχίστε.
Παρόμοια κατάσταση ήταν και σε σχέση με την Ουκρανία, επειδή η Ουκρανία, εφόσον έγινε ως ανεξάρτητη χώρα, ο λαός της Ουκρανίας και η κυβέρνηση και η Εκκλησία, η κλήρος και οι μέλη της Εκκλησίας ζήτησαν αυτοκεφαλία, να είναι δηλαδή η Εκκλησία της, όπως το γινόταν για κάθε μία αυτοκέφαλη εκκλησία και της Σερβίας και της Ρουμανίας και της Βουλγαρίας και της Γεωργίας και τα λοιπά και τα λοιπά. Δεν ήταν κάτι παράδειγμα αυτό.
Συγγνώμη να μεταφράσω. So basically the Ukrainian Orthodox Church asked from the Ecumenical Patriarch to recognize the autocephaly, as the Ecumenical Patriarch had already recognized the autocephaly of the Romanian Church, the Serbian Church, all the other churches that when they founded their nations and their churches, they asked for this autocephaly. So the Ukrainians said, as you have granted autocephaly to these other churches, please grant us autocephaly to us as well. Παρακαλώ, συνεχίστε.
Το ξέρουμε από την ιστορία ότι στα Βαλκανικά που έγιναν δηλαδή, εθνικά κράτη, ο καθένα κράτος ζήτησε αυτοκεφαλία από το Πατριαρχείο Κωνσταντινούπολεως και με παρόμοιο τρόπο έγινε αυτό και εκ μέρους της Ουκρανίας. Το θέμα είναι ότι η Ρωσία είχε κατηγορίες εναντίον του Οικουμενικού Πατριαρχείου ότι η Ουκρανία ανήκει στην δικαιοδοσία της Εκκλησίας της Ρωσίας επειδή υπήρχε ο τόμος πράξης του Οικουμενικού Πατριαρχείου που λέει ότι ο Μητροπολίτης της Μόσχας μπορεί, δηλαδή έχει δικαίωμα να χειροτονήσει τον Μητροπολίτη του Κιέβου. Γιατί έγινε αυτό? Έγινε αυτό επειδή το Κίεβο ήταν πολύ μακριά από την Κωνσταντινούπολη και ήταν πολύ δύσκολο να πάει ο υποψήφιος του Κιέβου στη Κωνσταντινούπολη να γύρει χειροτονία και να γυρίσει πίσω. Εφόσον Κίεβο και Μόσχα ήταν πιο κοντά, ένα κράτος πλέον, η Κωνσταντινούπολη παραχώρησε το δικαίωμα στο Μητροπολίτη Μόσχας να χειροτονήσει τον Μητροπολίτη Κιέβου. Όμως αυτό...
Μπορώ να κάνω μετάφραση. So basically what Professor Barnovi is saying is that when the Ecumenical Patriarch founded the Church of Moscow, the Patriarchate of Moscow, he allowed the Metropolitan of Moscow to put his hands, how you call this in English? I don't know. Chirotonia, but in English, but to bless, let's ordinate, yeah. So to provide ordination for the Metropolitan of Kiev, because the Metropolitan of Kiev was closer in distance from Moscow than to Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople. So it was easier for the Metropolitan of Kiev to be ordained by the Metropolitan of Moscow because they were closer, and so avoid all this long trip to the Metropolitan, to the Patriarch of Constantinople. Παρακαλώ, συνεχίστε.
Σε αυτό το ντοκούμεντο, σε αυτή τη διάταξη του 1686, είναι πολύ σημαντικό αυτό. Εκεί ο Πατριάρχης του Κωνσταντινούπολεως γράφει ότι ο Μητροπολίτης της Μόσχας μπορεί να χειροτονήσει τον Μητροπολίτη του Κιέβου, αλλά αυτό δεν σημαίνει ότι η δικαιοδοσία πάνω στο Κιέβο έχει ο Μητροπολίτης της Μόσχας, εφόσον αυτό το δικαίωμα δίνεται στο Μητροπολίτη Μόσχας κατ' οικονομία.
Okay, let me...
Λέμε ότι κατ' οικονομία δεν είναι μόνιμη, ας πούμε, πράξη, είναι...
Okay. So in the document of the 1686 document that allows the Metropolitan of Moscow to ordain the Metropolitan of Kiev, it says that this allowance is by economy, for reasons of economy. So they are not permanent reasons. It's not a permanent situation, and only as long as there is this issue of who is the closer. But the point is that it's not a permanent thing, and it states in the actual letter that this is not a permanent situation. It's only allowed according to economy. Okay, so it's not something steadfast by a rule and a patriarchal act. Okay.
Το θέμα, πολύ σημαντικό είναι ότι αφορούσε αυτή την άδεια μόνο της χειροτονίας του Μητροπολίτη Κιέβου, όχι της εκλογής του Μητροπολίτη Κιέβου. Η εκλογή ήταν στην άδεια της Κωνσταντινούπολεως.
And in that act, in that letter that was sent to the Patriarch of Moscow, basically the Ecumenical Patriarch was saying in 1686 that the Patriarch of Moscow has only rights in terms of the ordination, but he has not rights in terms of the selection of who's going to be the Metropolitan of Kiev, because the selection, the person who's going to be the Metropolitan of Kiev, this right belongs to the Ecumenical Patriarch, not the Patriarch of Moscow. The Patriarch of Moscow only has rights in terms of the ordination, but not the selection.
Αυτό ξεκάθαρα το επισημαίνει η πατριαρχική πράξη, σημαίνοντας ότι ο Μητροπολίτης Κιέβου είναι υποχρεωμένος να μνημονεύει κατά την Θεία Λειτουργία το Πατριάρχη Κωνσταντινούπολος, όχι της Μόσχας Μητροπολίτη. Διότι η εν πρώτης μνημονεύση του Οικουμενικού Πατριάρχη εκ μέρους του οποιονδήποτε Μητροπολίτη Κιέβου ως πηγή και αρχή σημαίνει ότι η Μητρόπολη Κιέβου ποτέ δεν εκχωρήθηκε στο Πατριάρχη Μόσχας.
So it's also established in ecclesiastical practice that the Metropolitan of Kiev always commemorates the Ecumenical Patriarch in any service that officiates, and not the Moscow Patriarch. And this also indicates that it was in the ecclesiastical order of the foundation of the metropolis of Kiev that it belongs to the Ecumenical Patriarch, not the Moscow Patriarch.
Η Μητρόπολη Κιέβου κατά αυτό το κείμενο παραμένει έδαφος της Κωνσταντινούπολεως, διότι η μνημόνευση κατά τη Θεία Λειτουργία είναι πρώτο σημείο της επέκτασης της δικαιοδοσίας μιας εκκλησίας πάνω στην άλλη εκκλησία. Ο όρος που αναφέρεται στο κείμενο δεν επιτρέπει στο Πατριάρχη Μόσχας να υποτάξει διοικητικά τη Μητρόπολη Κιέβου.
Okay, so the service, the divine liturgy service, which is a very important ecclesiastical service, in that service, the Metropolitan of Kiev has to mention the Ecumenical Patriarch, not the Patriarch of Moscow, which indicates that there is an ecclesiastical jurisdiction of the Ecumenical Patriarch on Ukraine and the Kiev. Yeah.
Okay. Από το κείμενο αυτό, 1686, φαίνεται πως ο Μητροπολίτης Κιέβου μνημόνευε το Πατριάρχη Κωνσταντινούπολεως, αλλά έπρεπε να μνημονεύσει τον Πατριάρχη Μόσχας, αλλά ως προεστώτα. Κάτι που δείχνει μόνο την πνευματική σχέση του Κιέβου προς τη Μόσχα.
And any reference to the Patriarch of Moscow within the divine liturgy should be evident only as pertaining the pastoral aspect, like that he was ordained by the Patriarch of Moscow, not the jurisdictional aspect of the relationship between the Metropolitan of Kiev and Patriarch of Moscow.
Από αυτό το κείμενο φαίνεται ότι τους Μητροπολίτες του Κιέβου χειροτονούσε πάντοτε ο Πατριάρχης Κωνσταντινούπολεως, αλλά μετά τα ιστορικά γεγονότα φαίνεται ότι ο Κωνσταντινούπολεος χειροτώνησε τους Μητροπολίτες του Κιέβου, δηλαδή προσωρινά αυτή η άδεια δίδεται στο Πατριάρχη Μόσχας εξαιτίας των συνθήκων που εμφανίστηκαν εκείνη την περίοδο.
Okay. Ωραία. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ, κύριε καθηγητά. Γιώργο, do you have any further questions?
No, I don't have any. Thank you very much for this explanation and the ecclesiastical status behind the different dates and centuries.
Thank you very much, Giorgos, for asking this. May I note that Giorgos has a PhD in theology, and he knows ecclesiastical things and theological things. That's why we're very glad to have Giorgos here. And also, I'd like to thank again Professor Barnovi for being so detailed and so clear. Thank you very much, Professor Barnovi.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Do you have any other comments or thoughts, Professor Barnovi?
No, I haven't. I don't.
Andrea, do you want to speak?
If there is nobody else to talk, I would say just to mention a couple of things.
Yes.
Well, always in respect to Palamas theology and to, in general, the patristic perspective of the subject of peace. Actually, it's a bit disappointing, but peace is not about to prevail on earth. That's something that has been pointed out by the ancient Greek philosophy and by the apostles and by common sense. You know, when Palamas talks about the brotherhood between human beings, divides this brotherhood into 4 ways. The first, let's say, brotherhood. I mean, to be brother to each other. I mean, it is correct brotherhood. He said that we are brother because we have one creator. The God creates us, but the same way creates the nature, the animals, and the rocks, and the mountains, and the plants. So in this way, we are brothers to all this. That's the first way Palamas talks. There is another one, let's say a little bit more logical. We descend from Adam. In this way, we are all brothers. But this has to do with the whole nations on earth. We are brothers. We are brothers. The Greeks, the Georgians, the Americans, and etc. The third one, because Palamas expressed this view in his first epistle, the one that delivers 3 days after his arrival in Constantinople, he says that especially for you, the people who were listening to him, you are brother because you come from the same nation and you live in the same territory. The third way of brotherhood. And then the most important, the fourth way, is that we are brother as long as we belong to the church, as long as we descend from the womb of the church as a mother, and as long we are baptized, and as long we believe in one God, as long as we have one faith. In this way, we're brothers, we're actual brothers. And I want to remind you that before the recite of the creed in the liturgy, the priest says peace upon all, if I remember well, peace upon all, and then exhorts everybody, let's love each other. So in accord, we recite the creed. That's a presupposition, the love to each other, to have peace, to have one mind, in order to confess our faith. That's the fourth way. We are in the church, we're baptized, we're Christians, we're Orthodox, so we have one mind. That's something that we don't see in the everyday practice of Christians. Actually, we don't see the peace, as I said before, in no aspect of everyday life. Actually, Heraclitus, Costas, you are a philosopher, Heraclitus says that the war, the absence of peace, is the father of everybody, is the king of everybody. And then Thucydides, when he was talking about the Peloponnesian War, he says that all these atrocities and the murders and etc., it's unavoidable. It's unavoidable as long as the human nature is the same. As long as the human nature doesn't change, this is something that we're going to have. So no matter if we are brothers in any kind, in any of the 4 ways that Palamas says, then the war or the lack of peace is going to be there. The Apostle Paul in his epistle to Romans, he says, let me quote, "If it is possible, as much as is in your power, be at peace with all people." So no matter if our God came here in order to bring peace, because that's the actual scope of the incarnation, to bring peace on earth. That's the actual scope. Nevertheless, this is not something given. It's not a kind of present. It's a kind of ascesis. It's a kind that you individually choose in order to struggle with and have peace with your brother, any kind of the four ways, and then to have peace with God. That's the way, not with God and with your brother, and then with God, in order to receive the Holy Spirit, in order to receive the grace, and then have peace. That's actually the peace. All the discussion about peace without this very presupposition, I think it's just Mattia, I don't know how you call this.
Futile.
This is actually the teaching of Palamas. Palamas is very realistic. Okay, we are brothers, but still we need to do something in order to live this brotherhood. We need to have this connection with God. That's the reason he excuses somehow the atrocities of the Thessalonians, of the Zealots against his compatriot, because no matter they were brothers, they were of the same nation, still they want to kill each other because they didn't have this very little aspect of the true peace, the connection with God. So go back to what Professor Barnovi says. All this stuff between Russians and Ukrainians and between Russians and Greeks, it's just because the lack of the communication, the union with God. Without wanting to live in peace, real peace with God, in connection with God, there is no peace. If there is no peace, there is war. If there is war, there is split in church. That's my little comment.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andreas. And you're right about this. I mean, this is what I term transformation in my paper. That the way, as long as we have the same nature and we don't try to change our nature with, of course, divine grace and ascesis and participation in mysteries and all that, we're going to have war.
Exactly.
And so you need to transform the transformation, Palamas says.
It's not enough to say that I am human. I have human qualities. I have heart and I have soul. That's too little. You need to transform, because the human nature after the fall, it's a kind of sick. We live in a sickness. If we don't go to cure through church this sickness, we're going to stay, as Thukydides says, in the same condition.
Thank you very much. And now I want to ask a question, all of you. I mean, what do you see about, how do you see this term political hesychasm? Do you agree with me that it shouldn't be used, first? Second, do you think that there is a problem in the way that certain philosophers and theologians are discussing church-state relations as relates to orthodoxy? What is your view on that? Who would like to speak first? Giorgos, do you want to start?
When I listen to the term political hesychasm, my mind goes back to meta-patristics theology, or political theology of the sort, which means that we have a hesychasm, inverted commas, that belongs to the so-called political correctness of the ecumenical, when I say ecumenistic spirit of modern world, in order to find union between the various denominations of the Christian churches. when we say hesychasm, it doesn't have to do with, it has to do with peace within you and God. St. Paisius was always wanted to be himself, by himself, and only with God, because he was a hesychast. When we say political hesychasm, we introduce this idea of political correctness in a very important matter of our theology, which is the culmination of theology through St. Gregory Palamas. So I totally disagree with that term, and it reminds me of metapatristics theology, which is again among many ideas which are I also disagree. I was reading to St. Paisius. Back in his time, he was saying that that was in 1979. I hear discussions, he said, that have to do many, try to bring all the Orthodox together in order to have preparations for an ecumenical council. And my understanding is that this, even if it comes, it will never have a fruitful outcome, because there are issues which the Orthodox among themselves won't like to discuss. So he said something that did happen in Crete. And I think that's because nowadays we mostly adhere ourselves to the scientific presentation of theology in terms of some kind of jurisdictional ideas that have to do with what we have studied, because this is how theological schools are about. I disagree with that, though I have my first degree is theology. I have a totally different point of view on the aspects of fightings between patriarchs or bishops, or because when you said about the autocephaly of Ukraine, more or less was something like with the autocephaly of Greece, something like that happened as well. Having the knowledge that all this, it's not actually uniting the Orthodox Church, but destroying the very core of the faith of the people, because this is what it happens today. And I'm really concerned why Orthodox are fighting to each other, and why never, the two patriarchs didn't come together to discuss that the major issue in the Ukrainian church is the so-called Greek Catholics. I will tell you an example. In 1993, I was in Germany, and I will tell you personal experience. I found a post to do a PhD in pastoral psychology in the University of sorry. That was, yes, north of Wuppertal. I will remember the city because so many years, more than 30 years. And everything was ready. So the 1993, I think, was 1 year after Patriarch Bartholomew became a patriarch of Constantinople, and he visited Germany. And we all went to Düsseldorf to greet him, etc. The whole coming of the patriarch was for our Orthodox to know that he came for the Greek Orthodox. But that wasn't the reason. He came for the Roman Catholics to put an end to the effort of the Roman Catholic Church to go to Ukraine and try to make more Greek Catholics than they were before, because that it was the time that the Soviet Union collapsed, etc. And because of that, the German universities stopped taking Greeks, because it would be considered as proselytization. And I learned that after some months, since I became aware that I wasn't accepted for that reason. If we take you, it was the University of Münster. If we take you, it will be considered as proselytization and could be against us. We don't want to say create a havoc between the relationship between the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church and the Patriarch of Constantinople. So I wonder why after so many, after 38 years, we don't see the reason of the matter. For me, the main problem in Ukraine are the Greek Catholics. I think their work during inside the Ukrainian church has created so much fights and so much havoc between the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Patriarch of Moscow. But nobody discusses that. I think this is the core of the matter. I would like to see both patriarchs coming together and have a decent discussion between themselves, and not a discussion. This is what I want from you, and this is what I don't find from you. This is what I want from you, and this is what I don't find from you. How can we find the royal line, a royal pace between us, so to agree? Because we have nothing to divide. We only need to unite ourselves. And this is what we don't understand. And unfortunately, in all these discussions about the Ukrainian, the Russians, and the Constantinople Patriarchate, unfortunately, that we see that many people taking sides. If we take sides, it's very difficult to come to a unified decision. But we need to see what are the things that unifies. We're not different from the Georgians. We're not different from the Church of Cyprus, from Church of Greece, from the Greek Americans. We are all one, but we need to find what are the things that really unite us. And this that I don't see, I haven't seen. Costa, you can tell me if I'm wrong. I haven't seen on any table of discussion that these are the things that we need to discuss.
If you allow me, I think
Professor
Barnovi can say a few more things on this. In church, there is an order. Okay, we have only 5 patriarchate: Constantinople, first Rome, but now the Rome has left. Constantinople, Alexandria, Antiochia, Jerusalem, and there is no room for other patriarchates. So when I repeat, Professor Barnovi, we talk better than this, and you need to understand, George, that the Russians want to replace the ecumenical patriarch. They want to become ecumenical patriarch. It's not enough for them that they are allowed to be what they are now. So that's the problem. The problem is not that they don't talk. They did talk, but they insist on their own. But this is not church. This is not church. The church has rules. But please, Professor Barnovi, he can talk more on this.
Professor Barnovi, please speak.
Καταλαβαίνετε τι γίνεται, ότι όταν άρχιζε αυτό το πρόβλημα, ο Ανδρέας λέει σωστά, ο Πατριάρχης Μόσχας θέλει να βάλει στη πλευρά το Πατριαρχείο της Κωνσταντινούπολης, εφόσον είναι αυτοκρατορία της Ρωσίας, και αυτό ήταν πριν αιώνες, όχι μόνο σήμερα και ας πούμε πριν 10 χρόνια, αλλά αιώνες που έχει αξιώσει να γίνει ο πρώτος μεταξύ των Ορθοδόξων εκκλησιών.
Να μεταφράσω. Let me translate. So Professor Barnovi agrees with Andreas and says that from before this conflict, like centuries ago, the Patriarch of Moscow wants to have the first role within Orthodoxy and wants to sort of sidestep ecumenical patriarchs, especially as regarding the areas of the Soviet Union, the previous Soviet Union. So he wants to look like, as the Moscow Patriarch wants to look as having complete jurisdiction over all the area of the previous Soviet Union. Παρακαλώ, συνεχίστε.
Αλλά εμείς ξέρουμε από την εκκλησιαστική ιστορία ότι η Εκκλησία γενικά ξέρει 5 εκκλησίες. Έτσι, Ρώμης, Κωνσταντινούπολης, Αλεξάνδρειας, Αντίκος, Ιερουσαλήμων. Δεν ξέρει άλλη εκκλησία και η εκκλησία της Κύπρου που ήταν από τρίτη Οικουμενική Σύνοδο. Οπότε αυτές τις εκκλησίες δεν ήταν εθνικές εκκλησίες, ήταν εκκλησίες των πόλεων. Για αυτό το λόγο αυτές τις εκκλησίες έχουν δικαίωμα να προχωρήσουν αυτοκεφαλία στις άλλες εκκλησίες. Το Πατριαρχείο της Μόσχας δεν έχει δικαίωμα να δώσει την αυτοκεφαλία σε άλλη μία εκκλησία. Ούτε η εκκλησία της Γεωργίας, ούτε η εκκλησία της Σερβίας, ούτε η εκκλησία, επειδή είναι εθνικές εκκλησίες. Δεν είναι εκκλησίες των πόλεων όπως Ρώμη, Κωνσταντινούπολη, Αλεξάνδρεια, Αντίοχεια και Ιερουσαλήμ. Δεν είναι εθνικές εκκλησίες αυτές τις 5
So
εκκλησίες.
let me explain. So basically, Professor Barnovi says that they were the established patriarchates that come from very, very old time, like the first even church that was made, was based on the cities that they had churches from apostolic times. So we're talking about Antioch, we're talking about Jerusalem, we're talking about Alexandria, we're talking about, and Constantinople became a church as important as the other because of the transfer of the seat of the capital of the Roman Empire from Rome to Constantinople. So these are the churches, the Antioch, Jerusalem, Alexandria, Constantinople. These old churches can grant autocephaly. The Moscow Patriarchate cannot grant autocephaly, as the Patriarchate of Romania and other places, they cannot grant autocephaly. They cannot grant this. It's only the old churches that can do that.
Ναι, για αυτό το λόγο όλες τις εκκλησίες μετά που δημιουργήθηκαν εθνικά κράτη, όλες τις εκκλησίες κατά το έθος πάνε στην Κωνσταντινούπολη και ζητάνε από το Πατριάρχη Κωνσταντινούπολος παραχώρηση το τόμο της αυτοκεφαλίας. Αυτό το πράγμα έγινε ως έθος.
And it became customary that the different nations, like the Serbs, the Romanians, etc., they go to the Ecumenical Patriarch to be recognized as autocephalous. It became customary.
Και αυτό το πράγμα, αυτό το έθος, τελικά έγινε ως κανόνας. Δηλαδή δεν υπάρχει ούτε μία εκκλησία στο Ορθόδοξο κόσμο που δεν έλαβε, ας πούμε, το τόμο της αυτοκεφαλίας από την Κωνσταντινούπολη. Επειδή αυτό έγινε σαν κανόνας. Αυτός ο έθος, επειδή εμείς έχουμε στο κανονικό δίκαιο κάποιους κανόνες, οι οποίοι κανόνες ήταν ως έθος. Ας πούμε, έκτος κανόνας της πρώτης συνόδου, ότι ο επίσκοπος Αλεξανδρίας ήταν στην Αίγυπτο, στη Λιβύη και στη Πενταπόλη, και αυτός ο παλαιός έθος να παραμένει έτσι όπως ήταν πριν. Αλλά όμως πλέον έγινε ως κανόνας, έκτος κανόνας της πρώτης συνόδου. Έτσι έγινε και στην περίπτωση της Κωνσταντινούπολης, που όλες οι εκκλησίες πάνε για να παραλάβουν το τόμο της αυτοκεφαλίας από την Κωνσταντινούπολη και μόνο.
So this custom became a canonical law, like ecclesiastical law. Okay, thank you very much. Now, I don't know if Gareth has any questions. Gareth, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, but it's way beyond my knowledge. But it's such a pleasure to hear this. I think it's incredibly important.
Okay.
I've not heard this matter discussed in this kind of way before, and it's a real pleasure. So thank you very much for allowing me to come along and listen.
Thank you. I mean, I have a final question, if you would like. Remember what I said about the church-state relations. Now, there is a discussion in the West that the church and the state should cooperate, right? They have a bond of some sort. So they see the Russian Patriarchate, the Moscow Patriarchate, as expressing this tendency that the church and the state should cooperate, because, as you know, the Patriarch of Moscow, Alexei, supports the war effort and supports Putin and all that. And they see this as vital for a church's survival. And they think also, some scholars, they think that this happens across Orthodoxy. It happens in all the Orthodox churches, including the Ecumenical Patriarch, the other patriarchates, the other churches, that they should support state authority and cooperate with state authority. And if the state, let's say, has a war, they should support the war efforts. Now, I find this problematic. I know from ecclesiastical history and the history of the Orthodox Church that we don't see this often. We don't see, like, the church approving a war or supporting a war, especially when it involves war against other Orthodox, right? We don't see that. We don't see some kind of church-state relations that we see in the West. And I would like to share some thoughts. I would like you to share some thoughts about it. What do you feel? I mean, is what is going on in Russia Orthodox Church, is what is going on with the Moscow Patriarch something that happens often, or is something very rare? What do you think? Who would like to start?
Κώστας.
Κώστα, εγώ θα ήθελα να προσθέσω κάτι, τώρα δεν
Ναι, πες μου.
άκουσα καλά, αλλά απλά εγώ θα ήθελα
να σου πω τι είπα, μήπως θέλεις να πεις και γι' αυτό. Εγώ λέω ότι πολλοί θεολόγοι στη Δύση βλέπουν ότι πρέπει να υπάρχει μια συνεργασία μεταξύ της Εκκλησίας και των πολιτικών συστημάτων και πολιτικών προσώπων. Άρα βλέπουν αυτό που γίνεται στη Ρωσία ότι είναι κάτι σύνηθες, κάτι συνηθισμένο και πιστεύουν ότι γίνεται και σε όλες τις άλλες Ορθόδοξες εκκλησίες και ότι πρέπει να γίνεται και στις Ορθόδοξες εκκλησίες αφού γίνεται στη Δύση, γίνεται στο Ρωμακαθολικισμό, γίνεται στον Προτεσταντισμό. Και θέλω να μου πείτε εάν συμφωνείτε ή όχι. Εγώ το βλέπω λίγο περίεργο και σπάνιο μια Ορθόδοξη εκκλησία και ο προκαθήμενος μιας Ορθόδοξης εκκλησίας όπως ο Πατριάρχης Μόσχας να υπερασπίζει κάποιον σαν τον Πούτιν στον πόλεμο. Εσείς το βλέπετε αυτό σύνηθες, το βλέπετε... Ποια είναι η άποψή σας, ας πούμε, ότι είναι σύνηθες στην Ορθοδοξία αυτό το πράγμα ή είναι σπάνιο?
Δυστυχώς, στην πρώην Σοβιετική Ένωση, από 1943, ο Στάλιν πλέον έκανε εκκλησιαστική πολιτική έτσι ώστε να βάλει την Ορθόδοξη Εκκλησία της Ρωσίας, ας πούμε πολύ έτσι μεταξύ μας, στην τσέπη του.
Okay, να το μεταφράσω. So Professor Barnovi says that especially in the Russian Orthodox Church, this is not rare, and this is not because Stalin tried to control the Russian Orthodox Church, and he had done this in many ways to control the Russian Orthodox Church and what the bishops of the Russian Orthodox Church say for the sermons, etc. Συνεχίστε παρακαλώ, ναι.
Μετά αυτή την πολιτική του Στάλιν, πλέον η Ορθόδοξη Εκκλησία της Ρωσίας ήταν σαν ένα τμήμα της πολιτικής κυβέρνησης της Σοβιετικής Ένωσης. Ένα τμήμα ήταν, ένα σαν υπουργείο δηλαδή.
Okay, so let me... οπότε λέει, so Professor Barnovi says that it became as a part of the state, like the leaders of the Russian Orthodox Church and the policies of the Russian Orthodox Church became as part of the state, of the Soviet state.
Σαν υπουργείο, σαν ministry.
Αλλά συγγνώμη όμως, το βλέπετε αυτό και σε άλλες Ορθόδοξες εκκλησίες ή μόνο στην Ρωσική Ορθόδοξη?
Δύο Ορθόδοξες εκκλησίες ήταν στη Σοβιετική Ένωση, της Ρωσίας και της Γεωργίας. Και το ίδιο έγινε με την Εκκλησία της Γεωργίας. Αυτό ήταν δηλαδή και
and Professor Barnovi says that it also became the same with the Orthodox Church in Georgia as well. It was controlled by the Soviet state. Αλλά το βλέπετε και για άλλες Ορθόδοξες εκκλησίες. Δηλαδή, για παράδειγμα, η Κωνσταντινούπολη, η Αλεξάνδρεια, Ιερουσαλήμ ή
σας
μόνο
πω,
στο ρωσικό κόσμο?
Ναι, και στο ρωσικό κόσμο και στις άλλες εκκλησίες προσπαθούσε η Ρωσία πάντοτε να έχει κάποια επιρροή. 1948 η Ρωσία ήθελε να κάνει 8η Οικουμενική Σύνοδο στη Μόσχα.
Okay.
Ξέρετε αυτή την ιστορία.
Οπότε, so Professor Barnovi says that in 1948, the Russian Orthodox Church wanted to have an ecumenical council in Russia so that it can influence all the other Orthodox churches and make them sort of accord to the Russian Orthodox Church. Αλλά επιτρέψτε μου να σας ρωτήσω αυτό. Οι άλλες Ορθόδοξες εκκλησίες πώς το βλέπανε αυτό το πράγμα? How did the other Orthodox churches saw this and responded to this?
Θα σας πω, οι άλλες Ορθόδοξες εκκλησίες το βλέπαν, επειδή ήταν και η Σερβία και η Ρουμανία και η Βουλγαρία στα σοβιετικά κράτη, δηλαδή είχαν πολλή επιρροή από το Κρεμλίνο. Και καταλαβαίνετε ότι ό,τι και ήθελε το Κρεμλίνο, αυτό κάνανε αυτές τις εκκλησίες.
Οι άλλες εκκλησίες, δηλαδή της Κωνσταντινούπολης, της Ιερουσαλήμ...
Το θέμα ήταν ότι ο Στάλιν προσπαθούσε να δώσει κάποια, να σας πω αλήθεια, ότι κατευθείαν έτσι, να δώσει κάποια χρήματα στον Πατριάρχη Κωνσταντινούπολου, στο Μάξιμο, αν δεν κάνω λάθος, $50,000 για να έρθει ο Πατριάρχης Κωνσταντινούπολου στη Μόσχα για να γίνει αυτή η σύνοδος, 8η Οικουμενική Σύνοδος. Αλλά τότε ήταν που ο Πατριάρχης Κωνσταντινούπολου, ο Μάξιμος, παραιτήθηκε και ο Πατριάρχης Κωνσταντινούπολος έγινε ο Αθηναγόρας, ο οποίος αντίδρασε αυτή η προσπαθία της Ρωσίας. Αθηναγόρα η Ρωσία το σταμάτησε και δεν μπόρεσε να προχωρήσει.
And in 1948, that the Russian Orthodox Church wanted to have an ecumenical council in Moscow, they paid money to have the Patriarch of Constantinople to come to Russia. But because of this scandal, the ecumenical patriarch resigned, and the new ecumenical patriarch, Athinagoras, at that time, stopped all these efforts because he saw this as going against the Orthodox spirit.
Εγώ θα έλεγα ότι ο Αθηναγόρας δηλαδή έκανε τα πάντα για να σώσει την Ορθοδοξία από την επιρροή της Μόσχας.
And Athinagoras, which was the new ecumenical patriarch after this scandal, did everything that Athinagoras could do, this new ecumenical patriarch, to stop the influence of the Russian Orthodox Church to the other patriarchates.
Το σχέδιο του Στάλιν βέβαια δεν πραγματοποιήθηκε, ευτυχώς. Και θα έλεγα ότι η Ρωσία εκ τότε πάντοτε είχε κάποια αντίδραση προς την Κωνσταντινούπολη.
And of course, Stalin's plans never became fruitful. And from that time, there was always a tension between Constantinople and Moscow and the other churches against Moscow. There was always a tension from that time on. Παρακαλώ.
Και όταν εμείς λέμε ότι να είναι η Κωνσταντινούπολη ανοιχτό και οι άλλες εκκλησίες και η Μόσχα βέβαια, μεταξύ τους για να γίνει συζήτηση πάνω σε αυτό το θέμα, θέλω να πω ότι η Κωνσταντινούπολη, ο Πατριάρχης Κωνσταντινούπολος, πάντοτε είναι ανοιχτός προς την συζήτηση. Και τώρα που έγινε αυτό το σκάνδαλο, αυτό το πρόβλημα για το ουκρανικό ζήτημα, ο Πατριάρχης της Μόσχας έσπασε δηλαδή την ευχαριστιακή σχέση με το Πατριαρχείο της Κωνσταντινούπολης. Παρόλο που ο Κωνσταντινούπολος δεν το έκανε.
And the ecumenical patriarch today, Bartholomew, is always open to discussion, and he commemorates the Russian patriarch, as all the other patriarchs, as because this is the custom in divine liturgy, the patriarchs to commemorate all the other patriarchs. But the Russian patriarch doesn't commemorate the ecumenical patriarch. But he should commemorate it, but he doesn't. So this shows that the ecumenical patriarch is always open for discussion.
Γιατί ο Πατριάρχης Κωνσταντινούπολης, η Εκκλησία της Κωνσταντινούπολης είναι η μητέρα εκκλησία για την Εκκλησία της Ρωσίας.
Yeah, because the ecumenical patriarch is the mother church for Russia, so the Russian patriarch should commemorate, but he doesn't.
Για αυτό το λόγο ο πατέρας Κωνσταντινόπουλος δεν το κάνει, δηλαδή δεν κάνει για να μην τον μνημονεύσει κατά την Θεία Ευχαριστία και λέει ότι όχι, εγώ μνημονεύω, εγώ θέλω να έχω καλή σχέση με την Εκκλησία της Ρώσας, αλλά η Ρώσας πρέπει να σταματήσει αυτή την πολιτική προς τις άλλες εκκλησίες.
And then that's why ecumenical patriarch is always open for discussion and commemorates the Russian patriarch, and is always open for that. Αυτό για το this question about the church-state relation and whether you can actually see this cooperation between church and the state in all Orthodox churches. Is there any other thoughts on this? Andreas, what do you think? Do you see this? Do you see this in the Church of Cyprus, for example?
But I just want to remind you that the Akathistos hymn was chanted first time when the church opposed the Persians, when they were about to conquer Constantinople. So a kind of degree of cooperation between the spiritual and the political authorities of a place, of a country, of a town, it is necessary. It is not bad. Bad thing is when you absolutize something. But even nowadays in Greece and in Cyprus and in Georgia, of course, we have this kind of agiasmos in many public places. Isn't it right? Yeah. That's a kind of cooperation. Okay, and that's not bad. That's not bad.
And of course, you served, Andreas, you served in the army. I served in the army. George served in the army, and we had chapels. We had priests, like military priests, who came and officiated. And
exactly. So that's not bad. That's not actually the actual meaning of peace, but at least is the meaning of our trial to save our dignity against some people that they don't have dignity. When you have somebody to attack you, what you're going to do? You're going to, okay, I'm going to be realistic. Some things, it's not just white and black.
Okay.
Many colors.
Right. Giorgos, έχεις κάτι να πει? George, do you have something to say about this, or?
No, I don't have anything to say about that.
Yeah, but I would like to bring you back to what Palamas was doing, right?
Yes, but
remember, Andreas, you know very well. The Zealots wanted to have him by their side to support their cause in Thessaloniki, and Palamas refused.
Yes, actually, Kostas, the first refusal of Palamas went to Patriarch John Kalekas.
Yes.
When the Andronikos IV died in 15 of June 1341, and there were a void of jurisdiction, and there was the other host, I don't know.
The successor.
The successor of the throne was just a 9-year-old boy, John V. Kalekas wanted to take the regency, take up the regency, but also John of Kantakousinos wanted to take up the regency, and Palamas was in the middle. Kantakousinos was a very good friend of him, and Kalekas was that's new. Was the high priest that ordained Palamas in 1326. So he had a relation with him, but he refused to him because, as the sources say, I repeat, as the sources says, he thought that Kantakousinos was a better ruler for the Byzantine Empire than the Kalekas. And he said no. But from that time on, Palamas suffered a lot. From 1341, 1342 until 1347, it was a nightmare for Palamas just because of this refusal.
Thank you. And we see that in his hesychastic approach that Palamas supported and all that, we see an attempt by Palamas to avoid political confrontations and avoid political role.
Yes, he tried to do this, but unavoidable. He involved into it. by his refusal, and he cited by Kantokousinos, he entered in that 6 year of conflict.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, that's a great big matter and subject.
But do you agree with me, Andreas, that political hesychasm is not the right term, and we should avoid discussing what the Russian Orthodox Church is doing as a form of political hesychasm? I think we should avoid using that.
I agree. That's not something ideal. I simply disagree. Disagree with them. I agree with you. But sometimes in our era, it's much better to have a dialogue in certain levels. No matter if I disagree with Muslims, no matter if I disagree, let's say, with Catholics or Protestants, whatever, with anybody, we need to talk, because we live in a very dangerous era, and we need to reconcile. How can I say this? In order to avoid something worse than we have now. Only for this, we don't need to agree. We don't need to stuck on terms. Just let them. Just talk with them. Since, as Palamas says, we are brothers, come from the same God and from the same Adam. Okay, just this.
But would you say that this is hesychasm in some way?
No,
like
it's not hesychasm.
What we see.
It's not hesychasm, because hesychasm, it's a practice of prayer, a communion with God. Okay.
So it cannot have a political agenda.
No. Unless with this term, meaning that let's talk about hesychasm, and I am around the table. Let's not fight.
Okay.
I don't know if that's what they really want to do.
That's not what they mean by that. They mean that the state can use ecclesiastical power and hesychasts within this ecclesiastical power structures. The state can use these hesychasts to promote a political agenda, as if hesychasm has a political agenda. And what I'm trying to say is that that's not right. I mean, and I just want to see what you guys are saying.
It's good to have a dialogue, but it's no need to use this political hesychasm. They can just say political, I don't know, dialogue. I don't know, something not to fight. But hesychasm has another purpose. I think that doesn't fit in this frame. I don't know.
Thank you, George. What do you think?
Well, I said my opinion before about political hesychasm. It's a political correctness between the various Orthodox jurisdictions, and even the term jurisdiction is not right. But I'm not using it, but it's used because of the Roman Catholic and Protestant churches. They have introduced this term, so the Orthodox use it as well. So I wonder whether the modern, inverted commas, modern Orthodox church or churches actually understand where all this is coming from, whether there is a political influence over theological jurisdictions. I'm using their phraseology, I don't agree with that, from the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope, to and the Protestants into the Orthodox churches. I'm smiling because I remember something from St. Paisius. Someone, a Roman Catholic faithful, went to his and saw him. He had a lot of things, and he said, "Oh, Father, I would like you to pray for the God to send us a Pope who would be very good." And St. Paisius said, "Whatever the Pope might be, he will still believe that he's infallible."
Okay. Thank you, George. Professor Barnovi, do you have something to say on this, or what do you?
No.
No. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for being here. You've been great. Thank you very much. We discussed these issues very, very well. I think made things more clear. Gareth, what did you find the discussion, and any final questions from you, or no?
No questions. I'm just really fascinated by the whole thing, to be honest. It's been so nice to listen to you all talking. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Gareth, for being here. Thank you, Giorgos. Thank you, Andreas. Thank you, Kotza. And thank you very much for all of you, and for your participation, Professor Barnovi, as well, in the volume. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wait, thank you. Bye-bye.